and they just want China to make greater contributions and get China to do what they could not get China to do otherwise by giving China a big head. And they will argue we're too smart for that. But for the moderates, they then argue that China is not in a position to be G2 because of China's domestic problems. If you look at GDP per capita, technology, and some people mention other reasons, that's just not wise for China to do that. There was yet another reason, of course, related to the break. If there is a G2 between China and the United States, what about other emerging powers? What about India? What about Russia? What about Brazil? And how do they think about this? And so from a Chinese perspective, there will be all these backlashes and without very clear benefits from the G2. China likes the G20, and that's very, very clear. They like the G20 even before the global recession. And, of course, before the global recession, lots of discussion in the United States of trying to make China a stakeholder power, and someone mentioned that this morning. One of the means of accomplishing that is to give China a greater share of a decision-making power in the international organization, and for G7 or G8 would make sense. Particularly after Russia joined the club, and if you look at China's total GDP, actually it's bigger than some of the G7 members, and that seemed to make sense. The Chinese government was very cool about that. There are several reasons. One reason is that they view G7 as a rich man's club, and they're concerned that if China joins it, the United States and others might use G7 as a political instrument to impose political values on China, which is not happy about. The second reason is that they also actually did not particularly think that highly of G7. Symbolically, it seems to be the highest level of discussion, but anyway, it's still largely a talk shop. And even when it comes to international coordination, it's non-binding. It really hasn't delivered that much. And the international organization they really value is the U.S. Security Council that has a real power, and China is a permanent member at the U.S. Security Council. So they were basically fine with how things go. If China was invited to join G7, that would be fine, but they were not going to pay prices to join it. But they like G20 even before that. And after, of course, the global recession, G20 now formally replaced G7. I think the Chinese government is very happy about it. They feel that they are not alone in that group. There are other emerging powers, even though there might be differences between China and some of these countries. But on the balance, this is going to be a more complicated situation. It will not be China against all the other Western powers. Okay. So that's where they are. And what's actually interesting here is just my own observation, looking at the breaks, is that no one seems to want to play second fiddle to the United States. You can argue that in some way it might be smart for a country, emerging power, to say, well, we'll double up, with the United States, leveraging the power of the United States and elevate its position. But none of these BRIC countries want to do that. The second question is that whether China wants to transform the system with the view to adapt it to their rights, or they're only mildly revisionist. I'm not sure about Brazil, but it seems to me that this is still a very much unsettled question for Chinese. I think the easier question is whether China should have greater influence. The answer is yes, they want to have greater influence, but they are not clear, in my view, about how hard they should push to get there really fast. It seems to me that they are taking their time, and their position is rising, and they are reasonably happy about that. Okay. When it comes to the fundamental nature of the international order, it's even less clear. I personally do not think that China really wants to challenge the existing international order in an explicit way, and you will probably not see any bold initiatives to do that. There are several reasons. One is that they obviously think this is not wise. It's not wise because there are so many powers now, including emerging power. It's a very complex calculation. And any single country that pushes too hard will probably invite backlash and will hurt you. But I also think that it also reflects some sort of unsettled national identities. This is a question I think some people mentioned. Is China a developing country or China is a developed country? Obviously, they are in some way yes, in other ways no, right? And this was the issue that sort of shaped the negotiation between China and the United States. The United States wants China to be to enter as a developed country. China wanted to enter as a developing country because of a differential treatment between the two groups. It's really kind of if you follow the discussion, on some level, the Chinese government is arguing we are part of the developing world. We'll never be a hegemon, no matter what. On the other hand, it seems that it's a logical conclusion for China's modernization is to become part of the developed world, right? Part of the modern world. Then what's the whole point of reform and modernization if you don't want to be part of a developed country? And the official slogan, of course, is to build a well-off society. But in the long run, clearly, I think the Chinese government and Chinese people want China to be a modern and advanced country. And this is kind of a more recent issue. When China first began economic reform in the late 1970s, that issue was not there, right? It's too far-fetched. I remember I was observing in Beijing, we becoming a developed country. Dream on, right? That's what everyone was saying. But now, it's becoming more and more realistic. If the country continue to control some of the serious problems they're facing and keeps moving forward, maybe one day they will get there. That's the first point. Second point, some people are already there, right? There was a large polarization, and some of the people are already very wealthy. They train their kids very much like that they're going to belong to the advanced countries. They send their children to be educated overseas, essentially acquiring all those values. On the other hand, there still is a large portion of the population that are underprivileged. That's the massive reason why this is very much still a settled question. You have to have domestic opinion for it. It seems that lots of people in China right now want China to be more assertive, but I'm not sure there is enough opinion or any clear guidance of how the new international structure should be organized. I think some of this is more reflection of sort of nationalist sentiment, and China should just be more influential. But then, of course, the question influential for what? And I think that is very much an answer question. The last question is whether Brazil and China have to be regional power as well. I think my answer is clearly yes. I think if you want to be a global power, you have to be a regional power. I think that's a typical course. You don't have to have a clear-cut regional leader. The fact that you may still have tensions with some of the country in the region does not necessarily mean that you have not become a regional power. All regional powers would have some animosities. It's very rare that you have this hugely important country in the region and everyone is happy about it, right? So you don't really need to have that clear cut. So the fact that, let's say, if China continues to have some tensions with Japan, it will make it difficult for China to be a true regional leader, but that's not impossible. So I do see that this as a natural process. Actually, 15 years ago, I spent quite a bit of time studying Japan's rise, and at the time, one interesting problem for Japanese foreign policy was that they were talking about being a global power. But there was no strategy about how they should be a great power in Asia first. So essentially, they want to leapfrog and move on to the global stage. They were doing that for very good reasons because it was very difficult for them to become a regional power because of the tensions with China and with Korea over history issue and with a number of other issues, partly because they, in order to be a regional power, you had to shoulder some regional responsibilities. And in the fast-growing East Asian economy, that partly meant that you need to open your domestic market for the exports for the region. They were not very willing to do that. Even during the Asian financial crisis, there was a lot of expectation that this was Japan's moment